Yeah, so to start things off, I grew up in a Christian home with a mom, a dad, and two sisters. I grew up always going to church, and that led me to this understanding of God and Jesus. However, I felt like I never was taught how to have a relationship with Him, and how to rely on Christ. And growing up, we moved a lot. I was born in Portland. We moved to Michigan. I spent some years in San Diego, but then a majority of my youth was spent in the Bay Area. And then later, they would move to Seattle, and I would go back down to San Diego for school. Growing up, I think my main identity was a soccer player, essentially. I spent many years climbing club rankings just to get knocked down by either my own ego, injuries, or the lack of faith in my coaches. Then going into middle school, I followed my footsteps of my sister and took a drama class. Because I always thought I was that kid who was energetic, loving, full of energy, and I thought that was a good avenue to go. And I loved it. It was my world in a way. I loved being on the stage, in the center of the lights, making people laugh. I think that was the biggest thing for me, was just how much I loved making people laugh. But I got sucked into it. I still was stuck on this idea of achieving it myself and on my own. Going into high school, I had a group of loving friends, and where we lived in the Bay, it was predominantly rich, and there wasn't a lot of believers, or at least to my knowledge, there wasn't many at my school, and so all my friends were non-believers. The place we lived in was full of pressure and anxiety to perform, to reach a high academic standard, to go to college, get a job, and then be at the exact position that our parents were at, which was upper middle class. And so the way for us kids to relieve that pressure was partying. One of the main reasons why I did this was, again, suppress the stress of pressure and worldly things, and trying and seeming to fail myself. In the world of acting, I was trying to be the best, and I was always labeled as most improved. I would make people laugh, or I would cry on stage, but my one friend, who I was extremely jealous of, was just the best no matter what. And so during this suppressed jealousy and anger and resentment, it followed through and came out when I drank and when I smoked. And there was one instance where we were on a hill and we were overlooking our high school football team playing our rivals. And so after we're done smoking, we go back into my friend's SUV, and I feel nauseous and lightheaded. And I think I felt like it was the air that I was breathing, and it felt heavy, and so I stepped outside. I laid myself on the hood of the car, and I faint. I roll off, and ironically, that same friend I'm extremely jealous and envious of catches me. I wake up and I'm in his arm, and he's like, "Caleb, are you all right? Are you all right?" And he drags me into the SUV. And it was almost as if God wasn't just flashing my life before my eyes, revealing everything that I was suppressing, all of the stresses, all of the anxiety that I was holding down and I was ashamed of. And I asked myself in these moments, what am I doing? This is not the answer. And so from there, I gave my life to Christ. And slowly, over time, I leaned off of drugs and smoking and partying. And it was good. I was finally leaning on God more than I was leaning on worldly things. And I was blessed too. I was accepted into a university, San Diego State, which many of my friends got rejected from. I also got the opportunity to study a passion of mine in acting and in the arts. And so I go in my freshman year searching for community. I had my friends back at home in high school who I connected with. I needed something like that in college. And my first step to that was in the wrong crowd. But God knew it was right. A girl who I knew in high school who was dating this frat guy, he invited me to a party at his house. And when I showed up, they didn't let me in. And I was like, hey, I know this guy, he lives here. He and his girlfriend said I could come, let me in. And they said no. They said, if you get the guy out here right now, we'll let you in. And I gave up. I ended up searching that whole night for a party, but every single time a door closed. God closed the door. God said, son, no. And from there I said, frats are stupid. Frats suck. But my search for community continued, and I found a community in a Christian organization, in a Christian ministry, through a good friend now and our connection to Chance the Rapper. I had a hoodie. It was this nice sky blue hoodie, and he points me out in the crowd and he says, yo, is that Chance the Rapper? I'm like, yeah, man. And then we start talking. That hoodie and that connection I had with him, I found a community. And I spent that whole year just soaking and absorbing the goodness of God in that community. And towards the end of the year, I elected to become a leader. I applied and got the role, and I met someone too at the end. It's funny because I thought she was flirting with me towards the end of that year, and it was almost like a seed that developed over summer. And then the start of my sophomore year, I reached out to her and I was like, hey, are you going to go to any more events? And she said yeah, and we started hanging out, going to church together. Well, at the same time, she's saying that she never flirted with me at the beginning, and it almost seemed like if she had any emotion, she was pushing it away because the attention I was giving her might have stopped. That chase might have stopped if she told me that she actually liked me. Either way, if she liked me or she didn't, there were red flags. We started sleeping over at each other's places, and this whole time, in my mind, I'm thinking her as my girlfriend. But she doesn't have that same connection. And there was a time where she had a sorority event, and she was on the verge of inviting a friend, and she kept asking me, and my whole attitude was, I want you to decide whether you want me to go with you or not, whether you want to accept me as a partner, whether you want to admit feelings for me, whatever it was. That was my whole idea and motive. And I was just going to do what I felt. I felt like I liked her, and so I was going to pursue and continue expressing how I felt towards her. She ended up taking me to this event, and then we became boyfriend and girlfriend. When we first started dating, she told me she wasn't a virgin, and I said, hey, that's okay, I'm gonna wait. But that didn't stop us from physical intimacy and messing around. At one point, I started making idiotic jokes, and I believe it became a foothold for the devil to tempt us. And eventually, we had relations. From the moment it happened, I didn't want it to happen. I wanted to stop. And at this point, we're starting to emotionally disconnect too. We're fighting about morals and different values. I remember one time we were walking to my place, and for some reason we were bringing up guns. And I said, I'm too much of a liberal to ever own a gun. That's kind of where our differences were. She's pretty conservative, and I was more moderate, leaning left. But just some of those differences just kind of slowly building this wall. Brick by brick, we were separated to the point where the only thing connecting us was our physical connection. And I hated it. Every time I asked for a break, we would have these arguments about, okay, but what about special occasions? Our birthdays, the days leading up before a break in school, and then what about coming back from school? And those conversations just ended up nowhere. And it just reminds me of Romans chapter 7. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, that I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do. If then I do what I will not to do, I agree with the law that it is good. But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me nothing good dwells, that is in my flesh. We were also fighting about which church to go to. I had my heart set on this one church, but she was constantly driving me away. And when we went to go to these different churches, she would go on her phone. She would say that she was testing out these churches, but she wouldn't put in the time or the effort to actually listen to the message. And so we went to the church that I wanted to go for once. And I just remember it was the first time I fell on my knees during worship. And I'm crying because I'm so guilty. I'm so guilty of how far away I've pushed myself. And she's right next to me. And all I get is a little pat on the back as I'm pouring out my soul. I just remember finally getting a break, winter break. And because there's no emotional connection and we're physically distant, I start giving her less attention. It's my birthday and holidays. And at this time, she's talking to an ex-boyfriend who she admit was abusive in the past and was flirting with her. But if I'm being honest, I don't really care, because I was almost hoping that she would realize what she was doing and maybe pull away from it. And it wasn't up until New Year's Eve where I finally started to get scared. And she told me, she asked if it was okay if she hung out with him that night. And so I folded and I said, no, please don't. And then insecurities start to seep in. Maybe it was shame, just that she had took my virginity and that was my connection, and I needed to try to preserve that in a way, preserve that unity that I broke with her. And so we started having fights about that. And in order for us to fix it, I needed to give her more attention. And because we didn't have that emotional connection, we started sexting. Not sending anything, but saying very explicit stuff. But things get worse. Coming back after winter break, I agree not to use protection. And when I'm done, I tell her to get off. But she doesn't get off. And when it's finally over, she goes to the bathroom to clean up, and I stay on my bed, curled up to the side. And she comes back and doesn't think anything's wrong. I tell her how I felt trapped and claustrophobic, and I just felt like I was in this darkness. And I think there she kind of had some sense of guilt, but it didn't last the next day. Remember, I had work that morning, and I was just silent. I didn't talk to anyone. I just did my job, did my 4 hours, clocked in, clocked out. And I came back and I opened the bedroom door, and she's excited to see me. She's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I'm gonna need a few days to recover." And the worst part about it too is I didn't even think that I had to break up after that. We just kept doing the stuff we were doing. It wasn't up until we had the ministries on campus were putting on a prayer week, a prayer night, and I had urged her to go, but she gave an excuse, whether it was school or a sorority event, on why she couldn't. So I go to this event, and I see someone, a girl, and I feel like there's some kind of attraction there. I don't talk to her that night, but to myself, I'm like, this is so wrong. Like I'm with someone, and I end up confessing it to my roommates, and I'm like, hey, I saw this person, and I kind of had feelings for her. Is that wrong? And over the time, they're seeing this train of abuse of her onto me. None of the none of the sexual aspects, but they're seeing these fights and these arguments that we're having with each other. And so when I tell him this, I remember my roommate, and it was my roommate and his girlfriend, and his girlfriend say, "It makes sense that you're looking for someone else because this person is not fulfilling you. This person is not good for you. It makes sense that you are emotionally looking for someone else." And that was finally the breakthrough of oh, I need to break up with her. But it still took weeks, because we had a mission trip coming up to Costa Rica. We were going to spend 1 week with each other. How in the world am I supposed to be friends and serving with someone I recently broke up with? And so I try to cordially break up with her to the point where there's some respect. And I tried to do it in the most loving way that I possibly could, while speaking the truth about how I feel like I am not appreciated. I felt like I was giving everything to her. I was laying down my life and my work for her. And every time I fell short of that, it was as if that was a sign to her that I didn't actually love her. And so I never felt appreciated. I always felt like I was the only one working in the relationship. And so I kind of laid that to her, and I'm like, hey, we can't be together because I'm not feeling appreciated. And so we break up, and we go to Costa Rica, and the whole time she's trying to connect with me. And I'm just so overwhelmed by what I'm already doing serving, and just seeing the lives of the people we're touching and hearing their testimonies, that it's hard to play this like double agent of fake friendship and serving. After Costa Rica, I sought after the girl that I saw that one prayer night. Because in my mind, I'm not going to change anything relationally on how I operate as a partner, on how I serve as a boyfriend or possibly a husband. So I thought I was okay. I thought, oh, I can just move on now. Everything's okay. And I had this lie to myself that I'm going to talk to her and it's going to be okay if it turns out that we're just friends. But God said no, and God spoke through her. And going into that summer, I just was alone. It really started to sink in on what I did, and I felt empty. I started feeling attacks from the evil one, saying that I wouldn't be able to marry anyone else. I thought of this girl that I had feelings for as too pure for me because of what I had done in this other relationship. I thought at some point that the only person I was ever going to be with was this person, that was the only person who would ever take me. And I hated that idea. And slowly throughout the summer, God was leaning me onto Him. I was telling myself that I'm forgiven through the blood of Jesus Christ, and that the next person I'm with, my next girlfriend and hopefully my wife, that they're going to forgive me as Jesus forgave me. Going out of summer and into the fall semester, this time now we're both leaders in the ministry. And so the first meeting we have, it's at the main staff member's house. And it's the first time I'm seeing her in 3 months. And the moment I say hi, I knew something's up. She gave me a weird response. She gave me a weird look. And I realized things were not as they were. Either she didn't change, I didn't change, we both didn't change, or maybe things were just off and different. So I'm diving deeper down into this, and more stuff is happening. She's making jokes about our relationship, and she's making jokes that were similar to ones that I made in our relationship. I had constantly played around with the idea that having a bunch of Calebs, a bunch of mini-me's, is going to be crazy. A bunch of ADHD kids running around causing chaos. And she had made this joke at this ice cream place, this one event we were having. And she said, "No one wants 100 Calebs running around." And that just stung me. And from that moment I realized, I need space from this person. So I told her that. I said, I need space. But that just led to more harassment. She tried reaching out to me more. She tried fixing me. She knew that she did something wrong and she was trying to fix me. And I said, I just need to be left alone. To the point where I brought it up to staff. And I was like, hey, I'm having trouble requesting space from this person. And so I told one staff member who was supposed to be my discipler, I told him, hey, here's everything we did in the relationship, the dynamic, the temptations we gave into, and here's where I'm struggling. And so we landed on this idea of having a conversation between me, her, and then two other staff members. The one that I told I told the context to, and then someone close to her. And so we're reliving memories and events that happened in our relationship. I'm the one mainly retelling them, and I'm told by the end that I need to give a clear distinction of what my boundaries are. My 3 boundaries were: don't make jokes similar to our relationship, don't touch me physically, and do not show up to my house unannounced. Now, I was waiting for a second conversation to happen for me to tell her, but because we were gearing up for a fall retreat, she was showing up to my house for worship and practice, and I obviously didn't feel comfortable with it. And so I told her, I said, hey, these are my boundaries, and she rejected them. She said that it felt like I was pushing her out of the ministry, and at this point, I'm already pushing myself out because of how unsafe I feel with her. At the same time, too, in the first conversation that I'm having, and I'm retelling these events, there's one event that God is constantly bringing back up. And I'm thinking to myself, why can't we hush this one? Why can't we just shut it off for just right now? And it was the memory of when we didn't use protection. And leading up the following days after that talk, I realized, that was sexual assault. Or that was rape. And because of this revelation that God gave me, I'm even more uncomfortable around her. I feel more unsafe. I feel more intruded upon when she's pushing these boundaries, when she's trying to reach out and trying to talk to me. And I'm going down this dark spiral of depression, self-hatred, doubt that what she did was even real, doubt that can that happen to a guy? Can a man get sexually assaulted? So I leave my position as a leader because I feel hypocritical to lead other people when I myself don't know where I was going. There was other things going in my life too. I transitioned from theater and a major in acting into studying film, and I was submitting a portfolio and it was rejected. And so I felt lost in this ministry. I felt abused by and harassed by my ex-girlfriend. And the calling that I feel like I have, I'm being rejected from. I'm being rejected from my portfolio and my art. And so I don't know where I'm going. And so I'm spiraling down just this well of self-hatred. And I just remember working at my Chipotle, and I'm frying chips every morning, just having these constant battles in my head about what had happened to me. And I remember just having this one thought of, what if someone pushes me from behind and my head gets dunked into the fryer? Like, I didn't think it would be that bad. And that maybe it would relieve some of the pain that I had. And I'm having these fights while I'm at work, just by myself, about, how did this happen? How can a guy get sexually assaulted? Is it real? Oh, God, where are you? And I started hitting myself. I remember one time I just rose my fist up, crying about everything, and I slammed it on my leg. And I do that 2 times. And on the 3rd time, I hit myself. God just says, son, don't hurt my temple. And I fall to my knees. And I just start praying. I'm like, God, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for the temptations that I gave into. I'm sorry for the way that I treated her and my selfish acts. And I'm sorry for separating myself from you. And remember, there's a few times during work where I'm having these fights, and I'm feeling like a victim. God is graciously bringing up other events in times where I was selfish sexually. And at first I just denounced it. I said, that's no. And then it was, what she did to me was worse, to the point where I just called her. And I said, hey, have I ever assaulted you? And she said no, but I doubted. And so I said, was there ever a time that I made you uncomfortable? And she said, yes, but it's okay. And then I instantly rebuked that. And I said, no, what I did was terrible. And I'm sorry. And then she asked if she did the same to me. And I said, yes. And we recounted the memory and we're in agreement. And we forgave each other. And the worst part of all of this is how I just feel alone. And I felt like there was no community around me because staff members weren't doing anything to bring up a second conversation with her, which I had openly said that I was okay with. My boundaries were rejected by her, and staff weren't enforcing the boundaries. So I gave it one last shot at that ministry. And I showed up to the last event, which was Christmas themed, and everything was different. They were twerking. There was a twerking game there. We had a white elephant exchange, and all of the people were ungrateful for their joke-like gifts. And I just felt like this is different. This is not what the ministry was my sophomore year or my freshman year. And on top of everything, and on top of the neglect on my issue and how nothing was enforced, I had texted the person who was supposed to disciple me, and I sent them a video sharing my side of the story, sharing about how I felt like how it was handled was unjust. And I said, hey, you can send this to whoever you think it's appropriate to. You can send it to her. You can send it to any staff members. You can send it to anyone in the movement. He only sent it to one person, which was okay. But that person never watched the video. And I felt like their excuse was that it was too much of a burden to watch, and they didn't want to put themselves through the emotional journey of what my video was. And so they were going to trust on the person who was supposed to disciple me on their thoughts of the video. And I felt like that just further illustrated how there was no sacrifice to lift the burden from me, and that I had to do it all by myself, occasionally leaning on God unintentionally. And I felt like God was telling me to just move on. The ministry wasn't the same anymore. Staff members never changed. She never changed to respect my boundaries. And so I left. And I texted all the guys who I thought I was close with, and I said, hey, I'm leaving. I know some of you guys know this story, but if you want to know why I'm leaving, what has happened, I'm more than interested to talk about it. And I sent that to a huge group chat with all the guys I was close with. I only got 2 reactions from it. Both were roommates. So I realized God putting those relationships away, that they weren't being fruitful. But it was okay because I felt released. I felt released from setting my life on these relationships. I felt released from a ministry that I thought was the reason why I had a faith. I felt released from a burdenful relationship and harassment and abuse. And I felt a release from one-sided relationships where the other people didn't care about me. And in that, God sparked creativity, and he gave me this wonderful blessing of a movie idea that I wrote in 1 month about how there's this guy who fails to heal from a childhood trauma and just spirals, and it's a constant loop. Whether I'm going to make that film, I don't know. But it was still a blessing to at least have creative liberty again, freedom, love, and peace. And in all of that too, I was gifted an actual community group with my local church. People who were older than me, who are wiser than me, have a deeper spiritual background, and has led me through fasting and just what it fully means to devote my faith to God, what it means to fully trust in him and to trust in Jesus. That at that point too, I had lost my job and I was just gifted financially, and so I was able to just fully dive into my creative side again, to dive into my relationship with Jesus and to fully lean on him and to not lean on others like I had in the past, to the point where she had broken a few of my boundaries in coming over to the house unannounced. There was a Bible study that the organization had at our place, and it was with the older guys. And after, there was some game going on. During all of this, I was just reading the Bible in my room. And at first, when I'm hearing all these voices and I'm reading, I feel like God is telling me to just sit in his word, to stay still, to stay calm. But then I hear her voice, and my roommate comes into the room, and I look at him, and I'm like, are you going to do anything? I guess he was ignorant about it, and he ignored it, and I'm starting to get overwhelmed and anxious, and so I slam the windows closed, I close the blinds, and I run to the back of the house to physically distance myself from hearing her. And I'm standing there for like 10 minutes just waiting to like get a sense of silence. And people come back into the house, and I'm like, all right guys, I'm gonna go to bed. And that roommate who ignored it said he was sorry, and I said it was okay because it wasn't his fault. It was her fault. She knows better. She knows not to show up unannounced. So I wasn't mad. I wasn't mad at them. I just felt unsafe again. But in all of this anxiety, all of this stress, I just tried to sleep it off. And I just remember closing my eyes, and it was as if these like purple drapes were closing in on me. And I got scared, and I was like, God, deliver me, ease my heart, Lord Jesus, ease my heart. And it just felt like I was sucked out, and I was spinning. And at first it was really dizzy, and like I could just see lights, and all of this was like almost out of body, and I felt like God was taking me away from the moment just to ease the anxiety. And that spinning almost became fun. It became like I was like on a swing with Jesus, just like in his light and in his presence. And from there, I tried to ignore the enemy in trying to say hateful things to her and how she continued to be selfish, and focus more on how God delivered me from that moment. Yeah, because only during this time of depression, self-hatred, loneliness, there was Jesus who saved me, who delivered me away from unfruitful relationships and unfruitful ministry. God is good. And I guess I just want to finish this up by describing my relationship with Christ and what it's like. The best way I could describe it is it's like an island. And around the island is a chaotic, stormy sea, with the occasional hurricane that comes in and tears off the island. And here I am in the center. But no matter what hurricane, what wave, what storm comes in and blows through, I'm still on the island. I'm still with him. I'm still dry. I'm still safe. And I'm still alive. Yeah. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. And I just pray that God blesses you.